Dear students, now I will discuss section 3 and section 4 of the prelude. Section 3. You tossed a blanket from the bed, you lay upon your back and waited, you dozed and watched the night revealing the thousand sordid images of which your soul was constituted. They flickered against the ceiling, and when all the world came back, and the light crept up between the shutters, and you heard the sparrows in the gutters, you had such a vision of the street as the street hardly understands, sitting along the bed's edge, where you curl the papers from your hair or clasp the yellow soles of feet in the palms of both soiled hands. The third prelude introduces a character who the speaker addresses directly. She lies awake at night thinking of her debased life. Then, at dawn, she experiences a consciousness of the world as she prepares for her day. This stanza is written in the second person, speaking directly to you, a subject who in the first six lines lies awake at night with insomnia. There are three moments in these six lines separated by the pauses of the semicolons because the setting is a bed with its sexual connotations and the subject is lying on her back. Critics have read this character as a prostitute. Eliot said that this stanza was influenced by his reading the novel Boubou de Montparnasse by Charles Louis Philippe, which is about a prostitute in Paris. The second line could refer to waiting for a customer. In the third line, the night is personified as the morning was in the second stanza. It's also ironic that the night is revealing since it is dark as opposed to light, which usually reveals the thousand sordid images is a metaphor for the smutty imagination of a debased woman. It echoes the thousand furnished rooms, but this time, rather than being hyperbolic, it diminishes her soul, which should be infinite, to an infinite number of images. Her soul has the qualities of a dream, but plays while she is awake. But in the dark of night, the sordid images also nod to the genre of this poem. It is an imagist poem. Images Imagism was an organized modernist literary movement led by Eliot's friend and editor Ezra Pound, and in which Eliot participated. The poem takes a longer pause after the play of images on the ceiling with a period so that you may linger there and imagine. The next three lines all begin with "and" but no punctuation, suggesting a rapid sequence of perceptions. All the world is personified. It left in the night, but came back in the morning. The light is also personified as a sneaky subject who creeps and is blocked by the shutters. Then it turns from a sight impression to a sound impression, which you heard the sparrows in the gutter. Hearing the sound of birds is a symbol of spring in classical poetry, but here they are the most drab birds, sparrows in the most lowly urban setting, the gutters. The world is as bleak as a soul. Then there's the complex line. You had such a vision of the street as the street hardly understands. The street here is a metronome for the world. It is also another example of personification and sends us back to the sawdust trampled street in stanza 2. Since we learned in that stanza that the feet of the pedestrians belong to the street through synecdoche, the people of the city also belong to the street. But the street is dumb, it hardly understands its power. But this woman, even with her limited soul, has the consciousness to see for a moment a vision of the street and so the world. She starts to get ready for the day, removing the papers from her hair. which were used as a cheap way to get a curl. The papers also echo the newspapers from vacant lots in the first stanza. Notice that the poem refers to your hair, but not your feet. It is possible that the yellow soles of feet are not her own, but those of a male customer. This image also constitutes the persistent motif of feet and hands, which especially when described as yellow and soiled, describe working class people by the appendages which allow them to do dirty work. This language can be read as insufferably classist, but there is also a sympathetic imaginative gesture in granting this woman a soul with a vision. Stanza 4. His soul stretched tight across the skies that fade behind a city block, or trampled by insistent feet at 4 and 5 and 6 o'clock, and short square fingers stuffing pipes and evening newspapers, and eyes, assured of certain certainties, the conscience of a blackened street, impatient to assume the world. I am moved by fancies that are curled around these images and cling the notion of some infinitely gentle, infinitely suffering thing. The fourth prelude, written several years after the others, introduces Christian imagery. Christ is imagined in the sky, blocked by the city, and in the street trod upon by pedestrians. The poem returns to the evening routines of the working class, numbed by nicotine and news. The speaker then gets personal about his emotional experience of a religious impulse intertwined with his poetic imagination. Then he dismisses these fancies with an embarrassed gesture and ends with an image representing a spiritual void. Prelude 4 introduces a new male character in the third person, also with a soul. His soul is either stretched or trampled, and thus is enduring discomfort. There is a special connection to the images of the soul of the woman on the ceiling in stanza 3, but the scale of his soul and the horizontal image of it being stretched across the skies suggests a religious allusion to Christ's cruciform position. The street, the character personified as the world in stanzas 2 and 3, is being trampled by the now familiar synecdoche of feet. This image of the street, taking on the suffering of the world, also becomes a metaphor for Christ's suffering. The skies, a symbol of heaven, fade behind a city block, covered as the shutters cover the sunlight in stanza 3 by the basic horizontal unit of the city, the block. This implies that the spiritual is fading and neglected in the modern city, but also immanent within it. The poem is returned to the evening as in the first prelude. It constitutes it continues the sibilant S sound pattern of the first two stanzas with the word soul stretched across sky, city, insistent, six short square, stuffing, etc. The poem's continued use of sibilants gives the speaker's voice the alienation of an aesthete who seems like he would have long elegant fingers. The adjective insistent suggests that the city dwellers are acting out of wilful desire, likely to return home after work, and too busy to pause and notice that they are trampling the meaning of life beneath their feet. The motif of time returns with 4 and 5 and 6 o'clock, but before the time was particular, now it has multiplied. These are uh, syncopate preludes, multiple syncopated preludes that are nevertheless identical. The poem tries to get the reader to notice this identity with two end stops at the rhymes block oak clock. The insistent feet, short square fingers, and eyes are all synecdoches, instrumental appendages acting in undifferentiated plural masses. The evening newspapers are a metronome for the cyclical, unchanging wastefulness of urban life and for its narcotic effect on people, like the tobacco in the pipe. We remember from earlier stanzas that the newspapers will become curling devices to contribute to the masquerade of a prostitute's hair and end up as garbage blowing in vacant lots around the feet of commuting pedestrians. This is a depressing judgment of human intellect as wasted on daily, mindlessly comforting entertainment. Assured of certain certainties represents a paradox because the newspapers are telling us certain certainties, not the real whole truth. The conscience of a blackened street returns to the motif of the personified street that was sawdust trampled, imagined by the woman, and then trampled by insistent feet earlier in the poem. Here is a blackened implying dirt and degradation, but as a conscience. Again, this imagines the ethical spiritual presence of Christ within the streets of the city, being trod upon but waiting impatiently to begin to have power or responsibility for the world. The poem stops fully here with a period and a line break for the reader to fully comprehend the image. The voice then changes to the first person perspective. I am moved. This makes the observation personal. The word fancies is a plural form of the word fancy, which was originally a contraction of the word fantasy. A fancy is something one imagines, a whim. So, in this meta moment, the speaker steps back and talks about how he feels, about how his imagination reacts to the images he himself has described in the poem. The verb curls echoes the curls in the hair of a prostitute in Prelude to 3. It is describing the way a particular human imagination works. There are images around which notions cling. Images come first, but fancies embrace these images. With the phrase, some infinitely gentle, infinitely suffering thing, the speaker returns to religious illusion, referring to the infinite gentleness and suffering of Christ. The parallelism of repeating infinitely creates a pattern to emphasize the boundless nature of this notion. There is also an analytical mind here at work that labels this religious impulse as fancies and a notion. So, in this moment, Eliot both expresses a religious desire that he experiences as inextricably bound up in his visions of city life and intellectually distances himself from his emotion. By ending the line with "thing", the speaker satisfies the ear with a rhyme for "cling", but surprises by choosing a word that, along with some, is indefinite and usually describes a material object. How can a thing suffer, let alone infinitely? It can if personified in the poetic imagination. Remember the poor trod upon street. The speaker then returns to the second person with "wipe your hand across your mouth and laugh". This gesture expresses embarrassment. It's a self-directive, a contemptuous order uttered by the analytical intellect towards the self who was moved by religious fancies. The world revolved like ancient women in the only simile in the poem, so it stands apart and has extra gravitas. Remember when all the world uh, came back with the sun in stanza 3. So the world vanishes and returns with the sun, with that is with daylight and human perception. Later the conscience of the street was impatient to assume the word. Religious fancies in the human imagination were impatient to take command over the meaning of the word. But in the end, the world revolves; it moves circularly without end. The prelude continues over and over, without the advent of meaning, a Messiah who would break through the meaningless cycle of life and death. Ancient refers to the old problems of human condition. Women are physical representations of the cycles of life because they give birth. The last image is a paradox because they gather substance to birth to light the world so they can see it, eat warm and cook their food. But they are getting it from an empty space in the sky, those vacant lots from the first stanza. There is nothing of real substance here. The world is spiritual void, yet we continue to live in it. This describes a meaningless existence. The poem ends in despair, but the upwelling of religious hope at the beginning of the last stanza will return in Eliot's later poems. The wasteland, the hollow man, and finally triumphs after he converts to Anglicanism and writes his first fully faithful poem, Ash Wednesday, published in 1930.